Hey everybody, welcome to this week's edition of Wanna Bet. Kip Keefer with you to get things kicked off as we move into the NFL Wild Card Weekend. 6 games on the schedule, a whole lot of action, and some very interesting matchups. I know Case is going to cover all of those for you in his segment coming up. And Case Keefer has been red hot on the NFL lately. He has pushed his record for the year with a 2-1 mark last week, up to, and he'll give you the exact figure, but I believe that pushes him to about 37-23 for the year against the spread. Very solid indeed, and he has really finished strongly. He hit his 9 out of 10 last week in college and pro. He and I both had emphatically the Georgia Bulldogs in the college football championship game this past week. Georgia, of course, if you had TCU plus 57 points, I'm here to tell you, if you missed it, you lost. 65-7. Georgia led 10-0 early. TCU put up a touchdown to make it 10-7. And then, good grief, that really inflamed the Dogs because they scored the next 55 points to roll up that 65-7 final. Probably the biggest blowout of any championship game in recent memory in the history of all sports. Absolute domination by the Bulldogs, a second consecutive national championship for Kirby Smart's squad. Once again, a team that had 15 players drafted off the 2021 championship squad and had 13 players transfer. That's 28 players off the championship roster from a year ago, and they still were able to put together an undefeated 15-0 season, SEC champions, beat Ohio State in the thriller of the year, and just rolled over the overmatched Horned Frogs in the finals in Los Angeles this week. So congratulations to Georgia, and for all of you who only had to surrender 12 points in that game, but Case and I both told you that this should be a cakewalk for Georgia, and it certainly was. It's nice to watch a game that you have some involvement in financially and never ever sweat that whole game. Georgia showed from the very beginning they were dominant and were going to just roll to a big victory. And that's exactly what happened. So I hope everybody cashed and get ready for the NFL playoffs this weekend. Again, I know Case will have picks and a lot of analysis on those games. Interesting matchups there. It's amazing that the Seattle Seahawks, a team that really was not highly thought of at all going into the season, managed to make the playoffs. They gutted out a win last Sunday against the Rams, and then watched the Detroit Lions, but their win eliminated Detroit from playoff consideration. But the Lions still went it to Lambeau and went out on a cold Sunday night and played a tremendous game that on paper and as for playoff implications meant nothing, but they eliminated the Packers and sent the Seahawks to the playoffs. Now, be careful what you wish for if you're a Seattle fan, because they have to go to San Francisco and play the 49ers, who have been absolutely bulletproof the second half of the year, basically ever since acquiring Christian McCaffrey. Even with the injury to their quarterback, Jimmy Garoppolo, they've been getting it done with Mr. Irrelevant. I don't think everybody realizes Brock Purdy was the very last player taken in the NFL draft. And now, look at him. He is on a win streak with the San Francisco 49ers, one of the favorites for the Super Bowl from the NFC. They host Seattle, the unlikeliest of playoff teams in that first round. Some other intriguing games in the AFC. The Dolphins have already played Buffalo twice, and both games have been tough and close. Dolphins hoping that Tua Tagovailoa can come back and be ready to go for them. But that's a tough first-round draw for the Bills, even though the Dolphins finished losing 5 out of their last 6, but they won when it counted, beating the Jets on Sunday to get into the playoffs. You've also got the Cincinnati Bengals in another oddity, hosting the Baltimore Ravens in Cincinnati in round 1. They just played last Sunday. Cincinnati beat the Ravens handily, and now Baltimore has to come right back. But the suspense there is, will Lamar Jackson play for the Ravens? He's been out for 5 or 6 weeks with an injury. Still no word if he's ready to go or not. That's going to make a huge difference in that game, and it will make a big difference even if he can go, if he's not 100%. You don't mind having Lamar Jackson even at 80%, but against the Cincinnati team that's been just great the second half of the season, the defending AFC champions, one would think you need a healthy Lamar Jackson to overcome that road assignment in Cincinnati. So that's a couple of the interesting games that are coming up in the playoffs this week. Case, again, will have all of his NFL picks, and again, he has turned a kind of a mediocre start for him. He has been hailed and is actually an award winner as being one of the top prognosticators on NFL football in the country. Some tracking services that really follow all media types, and Case, again, is the sports editor of the Las Vegas Sun. Right out there, he's our guy in the desert. But in tracking of picks of experts, Case has twice ranked in the top 5 of all the nation's handicappers in the country on NFL games. So great information upcoming for you on that. And my segment, no college games to tout you on. We finished really strong on college football and had a good season. But I will tell you some futures things to start thinking about and some other good information on college football and some of the developments since we watched the championship game this past week. So a lot of good stuff coming up here on Wanna Bet. We will be here on TKR with Wanna Bet for the next couple of weeks leading right up to the Super Bowl. And then we're going to talk about what we're going to transition to in terms of keeping you in the loop in all things sports and sports wagering. We hope you've enjoyed our format this year. A lot of sit-down discussions and talks with Case on various subjects on football betting and the new, really brave new world, I guess you can say, of analytics, which is the hot trend right now, of course, in really analyzing all the statistics, all the numbers, and coming up with really kind of logical solutions to cracking the code of the game set every week. And of course, that's the same tactics that the odds makers utilize to maybe come up with a really good place to set lines. And you hear people all the time talking about, Vegas really knows what they're doing because a game seemingly lands right on the line just about every time. But basically, that's a two-step process. It's one, to kind of figure a good number that's reasonable for betting the game. And two, it's also to determine a number that's going to entice the players one way or the other. You don't want to set it too high and have people jump to that extreme, or too low and have people all over the favorite. So there's a real art form in putting out a perfect line that attracts attention from both sides, people that like the underdogs or like the favorites, and you got to entice them properly with that number to get a lot of play in the game. So that's the misnomer, is that they set the line sometimes trying to favor one team or another and try to draw action on an underdog or a favorite with the mistaken belief that they know something that's going to happen. But it's really to get overall as much bet on games as possible by making that line enticing and attractive propositions for both sides. So a lot of good stuff coming up here on Wanna Bet. We are delighted to be here on TKR and on Spotify, wherever you're listening to us. We're glad to have you on board. Stay tuned. We got a lot more. Case Keefer up next with the NFL Report.
Hey, it's Case Keefer with my Best Bet segment on this week's Wanna Bet. A little bit different with college football having wrapped up. Of course, all year we've split our time between college football and the NFL. I like the setup, so we're going to keep it today, even though it'll be a little bit different in college, obviously with no games. to talk about, but there's no true offseason in this thing. I've already made a few bets for next year, and I guess I'll share them exclusively here as I haven't even written about them yet. Maybe they'll be some of them will be in my column on LasVegasSun.com that kind of has to do with all things gambling over the next few weeks, if you want to check that out. But also, looking back on this past season, finish it off on a high. If you've been following my stuff at LasVegasSun.com, I locked in Georgia plus 450 right before the season. I thought that was a good bet to win the national championship. That comes in, that cashes, as well as a Georgia minus 12 bet I gave out on the show, wrote about. Despite holding that futures position, I was pretty sure they were going to roll TCU. Probably not to the degree they did at 65-7, but we'll gladly take the money. That means the record for the year on the show, 31-25-1 on college football. Pretty happy with that. We're up and down middle in the season. Was kind of frustrating on a week-by-week basis, but we stuck with it. Ended up getting the Georgia future. If you followed me way back, the Caleb Williams Heisman future at 15-1, a whole bunch of conference championships. So all in all, a very good season, and I feel like the work has already started on next year. Like I said, I already made some bets, including one on the national championship. My only request here is you don't laugh at what I'm about to tell you, because I'm sure some people will want to, but hey, some people wanted to 2 years ago when the first bet I made was Georgia 10-1 to win the national championship. Of course, that worked out. This past year, my first two bets I made were Ohio State at 6-1 and Tennessee 125-1. Neither of those cashed, of course, but I really stand by both of them. I mean, Tennessee, if you're in a jurisdiction where you can cash out or perhaps sell, prop swap type service where you can sell your ticket to somewhere else, that Tennessee ticket held value deep into the season. I have no regrets about that. I make that bet again now if you tell me we're restarting the 2022-23 season. And then Ohio State, getting them at 6-1, it really allowed me kind of that flexibility, that wiggle room to also lock in Georgia at plus 450 going into the season. If I didn't jump on it right away and I kind of waited, I don't think I'm going to be taking both those teams at 3 or 4-1. That's just too low. So if you're looking at this like I am, where you're trying to build a portfolio, get the best positions on teams that you think actually have a chance throughout the year, I think my process went pretty well this past year. So how is it going to start in 2023, 2024? Well, the first bet I have made on the national championship, actually on the Texas Longhorns at 30-1. Like I said, don't laugh. I know every year the Longhorns is a running gag. Are they back? The answer is almost always no, but I thought they were a really, really good team this year. If you look at the kind of advanced metrics, the power ratings, they're like a top 6 or 7 team. They have a lot back. And, I want to look at a team that can not only get there, but compete and have a chance against some of these, current powerhouses of college football. And if you look at, some of the composite talent rankings, recruiting rankings there, I mean, Georgia and Alabama are kind of in a tier of their own, along with Ohio State. But, right after that, I think Texas might lead the next group. All their losses this year were by a one-score game. I think you see that flip year over year. I think they're going to be a lot better in that regard next year. Quinn Ewers just looked hurt over the second half of the year, and he was dealing with an injury. I think he's going to be healthier. But hey, even if he's not, and he's just not that good, they have Arch Manning, the number 1 recruit in the nation, as their backup quarterback. I think they should roll through the Big 12. I don't think they'll play a single close game in the regular season except at Alabama, and even that's one you can lose, and if you're respectable, you're not going to hurt yourself at all early in the season. So I don't necessarily think they're going to win, but look, 30-1 means I need them to win it more than 3.25% of the time if we were running this season millions of times. And I think that's a no-brainer for me. 30-1, I have no problem starting my futures portfolio for next year with Texas at 30-1. I also have 2 bets on the Heisman. Unfortunately, I guess neither of them kind of the sexy names, the guys at the top of the board. I'm sure I will be on some of those guys eventually. I already have my eyes on a few, but maybe stay tuned for the next few shows. We'll see. I want to see some more books open. But I took 2 long shots to start this out. I already hinted at one last week, Wisconsin quarterback Tanner Mordecai. I was hoping to get better than 50-1. Well, he opened 120-1 at one sportsbook. You can still widely find that. I think that's just a great price. I mean, Phil Longo is one of the best offensive coordinators in the nation, in my opinion. If you look at Drake May's numbers, what he did this year at North Carolina, his powers are kind of going to be transferred to Mordecai here now in the Big Ten. I think Wisconsin should easily win their division in the Big Ten next year. A somewhat tough schedule, but all their hardest games, including against Ohio State, are at home. If they win their division, like I'm pretty sure they will, they're going to be in the Big Ten championship game, a chance to knock off Ohio State and Michigan, kind of rubber stamp his case there. So Mordecai 120-1. My other one, an even bigger long shot, though I'm not sure he should be. I also took Brock Bowers at 150-1. I kind of agree with the consensus you're already seeing that Georgia's going to have the best team back. They're going to be the preseason number one. With their schedule, it's really hard to see them not being in the playoff again. And who's going to be the face of the team? To me, it's not going to be Brock Vandegrift or Carson Beck, whoever starts a quarterback. It's going to be Brock Bowers after what we've seen out of him this year, especially in the championship game. I think he could set tight end records next year. And you're giving me what I think will be the best player or the most visible player on the best team at 150 to 1. I got to think he closes a lot less than that. It's going to be Brock Bowers at 150 to 1. And as promised, we'll get into the NFL now. I have 3 plays, I guess, on the wild card weekend. 35, 22, and 4 on the year in NFL on the show. Scorching hot, still 2-1 last week. We'll take it. Like I said, 3 more plays here. Let's start 2 Saturday games. I'm going to take Seattle plus 10 at San Francisco. This is mostly 9.5, but it keeps bouncing back to 10 at certain sports books, and people buy it. So I would say just watch a screen if you can get at your odds screen. As soon as you see it hit 10, bet 10. This is still a divisional game. The line was 3 when they played earlier last month. San Francisco won by 8. I think 10 is way too much for 2 familiar opponents. I mean, Brock Purdy, still a rookie quarterback. He's been very impressive, but for rookie first playoff game at laying 10 points, too much to me. Seattle plus 10. I unfortunately don't think they'll win outright. I'd love to see that, but I think they cover this 10-point spread. And then the nightcap, the Chargers laying 2 at the Jaguars. I think this closes 3, so go ahead and lay anything below a field goal. I think the Chargers are kind of weighed down because they were so beat up all year and really kind of underachieved from a statistical perspective. But sometimes you got to look beyond, just what the numbers say this year because, like I said, so many other guys were hurt. The receivers, Joey Bosa, I think they're a lot better than the Jaguars, and they avenged their big defeat to them. So Chargers -2. And then finally on Monday Night Football, another road chalk, but I got to do it. I like the Cowboys -2.5. I don't know why stock is so low on the Cowboys right now. I think at their best, we've seen them clinch the 2 biggest blowout wins of the season in the NFL. Blowout wins actually more predictive going forward, even against bad teams, than a close win against another good team. I think this team can really threaten anyone in the NFC. The Buccaneers just have not really been that impressive this year. Of course, they did beat the Cowboys early in the season, but I think the Cowboys are just a more complete team right now. Didn't have a whole lot to play for down the stretch, especially in this Week 18 game against the Commanders. So I think this is kind of an overreaction to them not looking their best going into the playoffs. But I'm not worried. I just think it's a really well-rounded roster. So Dallas -2.5 to go with the Chargers -2 and the Seahawks +10, as well as those college football future plays. That'll be it for this week on Best Bets. Stay tuned to hear Kip's segment next.
Kip Keefer back with you for our 3rd segment on the show today as we talk about college football. And this is going to be sort of a post-mortem on the college football season. I think some valuable lessons were learned, particularly in the college football playoff, which this 4-team format we only have to endure for 1 more year. But from a betting standpoint, I think that's important to point out a couple of things that I was trying to say frequently during the week on my various programs and prediction platforms. And this time, happily, it all proved to be exactly accurate. So we had the championship last week, Georgia TCU. That, of course, emanated from the 4 teams being named in this order to be in the playoff. Georgia number 1, Michigan number 2, TCU number 3, and Ohio State number 4. That was problematic from the very beginning. Not so much the teams that were named, but the seedings were all wrong. Completely wrong. And we pointed it out right away, and it was motivated, I think, by human desire to avoid an Ohio State-Michigan game in the early round of the playoff after they just played a couple of weeks ago, and Michigan beat Ohio State so badly in the second half to win that game in Columbus. But the problem with that was by not seeding properly, and that was completely not seeded properly. First, let me point out that the 4-team model really spectacularly failed this year in concept because Georgia and Michigan were the no-brainers that had qualified in the top 2 spots. But then you could have taken 3 through 9, literally 3 through 9, that's 7 teams, and you could have basically reached into a hat and drawn out the two teams to fill the 3 and 4 spots, because every single team in that group of teams had flaws. Some had the credit to winning their conference championship going for them, but they had multiple losses. Others, like the two that end up settling into those spots, TCU and Ohio State, were not conference champions, but they were both fortunate enough to only have one loss, and I think the committee took the easy way out and chose those two because they had one less loss. Now, remember what the mission of the college football playoff is, and you can look it up on their website. It is to identify the 4 best teams. Now, it's interesting. Anybody you talk to has a different take on this, because I'm surrounded, of course, by Alabama fans who say anybody with a brain that knows anything about football knows that Alabama was one of the 4 best teams. But then you talk to other people and say, well, Alabama's got no excuse because you've got to do it on the field. They lost 2 games. They didn't deserve to be in the playoff. So which one is it? Is it the 4 best teams, or is it who does the job on the field, so to speak? And of course, both of those arguments are accurate, but it really kind of dramatically underlines the problem with this 4-team format, because no one with any kind of sense of consciousness can look at TCU and say if they played Alabama, they would win. Alabama would be a double-digit favorite. So there's the flaw in the system. Yes, TCU had a glorious season and deserved to be in the playoff, but to keep the number 3 ranking, if they're going to keep them in that spot, despite them not being a conference champion, losing to Kansas State in the Big 12 title game, that was unjustifiable, because in Las Vegas, they have this measuring metric, diagnostic, analytic formula for determining who the most powerful teams are, and they put them in rankings each week for their own internal purposes of making lines. The season started with those top 3 teams being Alabama, Ohio State, and Georgia, and there was a wide gulf, a wide distance back to the number 4 team in that and all the rest of the top 10 or 12. So the point is, as the season went on, Georgia ascended to the number 1 spot with the Alabama loss to Tennessee. Of course, Tennessee in the college football playoff was number 1 at the time, but Georgia stayed consistent in that top 3, as did Ohio State and Alabama, even when they stumbled. Ohio State's loss to Michigan dropped them pretty much right in line with Alabama. Those two were basically 2-3, 2A and 2B the rest of the year behind Georgia. The point is that from a analytical standpoint in Las Vegas, which is odds makers, and there's reasons those hotels are 70 stories high, but the same analytics and diagnostics and information was available to the College Football Committee. That's what they're supposed to be pouring over along with the eye test, but it's kind of political from the standpoint that the SEC is kind of a despised conference now. A lot of the purists in the sport and the other conferences kind of look at them as the Darth Vader trying to be the great invader, so it's a tough situation to put other athletic directors from around the country in those positions to make those determinations. I've always said, even though people scoff at this, that the foremost experts on who the best teams are the people in the desert, and there should be a couple of them on that committee. It just makes sense, instead of having people from the ACC and the Big Ten and the Pac-12 all resentful right now of what the SEC's done in terms of dominating the postseason in recent years, and also the sudden announcement last year that Texas and Oklahoma were coming over, which really caused a lot of unrest. It delayed our college football playoff from expanding to 12 teams by a whole year because nobody would work cooperatively, because they were stewing over in the corner about what had taken place. So everything is starting to sort out now, but that was a very shocking decision to force Georgia and Ohio State, which are considered and are definitely by all the numbers two of the best three teams. So the de facto championship game was in Atlanta on New Year's Eve when Georgia overcame Ohio State. Now you've change that to the TCU-Michigan game. TCU got a lot of capital for upsetting Michigan, who was an 8-point favorite in the Fiesta Bowl in round one. But if you look at that game, and I think I pointed it out to you last week, it was kind of an aberration, and the reason for that is because Michigan basically gave up two unbelievably good scoring chances inside the 2-yard line and got no points whatsoever on either of those opportunities. And through two pick sixes, TCU interception returns for touchdowns that really created what amounts to a 28-point swing in that game. And Michigan still came back and only lost by 5. So what that tells you is TCU didn't really beat Michigan. Michigan beat Michigan. And a lot of that's Jim Harbaugh, who's kind of aloof and just off in his own world at times, making some very questionable decisions, and his team not being fundamentally sound. You had to listen to what we were talking about all year about Michigan's schedule. 7 of their wins on the regular season were against highly suspect teams, really bad teams. Let's cut to the chase. When your first 3 games are Colorado State, Hawaii, and UConn, I mean, come on. That's just ridiculous. And there were so many weak sisters in the Big Ten, particularly Rutgers and Nebraska, and Indiana had a bad team this year, and that's 6 of their wins right there. So this is a team that had gaudy statistics, but if you looked a little deeper, they really did not have a big challenge, and the only time they really shined was in that Ohio State game where they kind of shocked the Buckeyes by going upstairs, throwing the ball everywhere in the second half, not the personality of their team all year. And as we saw in the Georgia game, Ohio State secondary pretty vulnerable to a deep passing attack. Georgia came back by hitting big plays down the field. So that result was kind of misinterpreted, I think, not only by the public, but even by the odds makers, who only made TCU a 12-point underdog in the championship game. When you look at Georgia lines throughout the year, Georgia was massively big favorites against quality SEC teams week to week. And if TCU had been in the SEC, they probably would have been a middling team. And in a regular season game, I contend Georgia would have been a 19 or 20-point favorite. Of course, that didn't matter as it turned out. Georgia won that game by 58 points. And so no matter which direction you went, that was going to be the winning result for Georgia, because I don't think they were going to make that line 44 or 45. So whether it was 10 or 12 or 19 or 20, it pretty much proved inconsequential. But what it did prove is the 2 best teams were not in the championship game, so the formula failed. But congratulations to Georgia. Case already gave you some interesting props coming into next year for futures. I hope you'll, as I close here, note that the word portfolio he uses all the time is exactly how he approaches it. This is not recreational sports betting. This is an investment strategy that he has, and he is cashing tickets on these futures bets, 4.5 to 1 for Georgia to win the whole thing. I don't know how much he wagered, but I'm sure it was a considerable amount. So congratulations to my co-host, my son, and my favorite editor in sports at the Las Vegas Sun in Nevada. Listen to his stuff on LasVegasSun.com. Okay, folks, we're all set for this week. The NFL playoffs, it's going to be great. We hope you've enjoyed the show. I'm Kip Keefer. We will see you next week here on TKR and Spotify with Wanna Bet.